Welcome back to our retrospective of best things from video games in 2019, and today we're covering our favorite boss fights of the year. I have to say, I'm really happy to do this list again because last year, we didn't even talk about boss fights. 2018 was mostly filled with games about exploring your own personal internal struggles, which make for great stories, but don't lend themselves to boss fights. But 2019 gave us a plethora of amazing boss fights, so many so it has never been harder for us to narrow a list down to just 10. But against all odds, we were able to do it, so allow us to share with you our 10 favorite fights of the year. Now, just to go ahead and clarify something, there is a 1 fight per game limit allowed, and many of these fights are going to come at pinnacle parts of the story of these games, some of them even coming at the very end of the game. So be warned, if you see a character or a game pop up that you aren't that familiar with or you haven't finished yet, we are going to be getting into some spoilers. But here we go at number 10, OD from Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Bloodstained was meant to be a big nostalgia trip for fans of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and the biggest slice of that came from the character of Orlok Dracul, who didn't just resemble Alucard from Castlevania, he was even voiced by the same actor. Throughout the game, OD will rent you books from his library that provide you with stat buffs, but after you beat the game, you can now rent a brand new book from him. However, he isn't exactly happy about you taking that one and says you have to return it soon. And if you don't listen to him and you take that book to a special room, he appears before you and says your time is up and now you have to pay the late fees. He then enters a bow to the death with you, and we find that he doesn't just look and sound like Alucard, he fights like him too. He turns into mist to teleport, transforms into animals, even stops time to set up a full screen barrage. So this entire battle is just another celebration of Castlevania, which is what this entire game was meant to be. However, what gets OD onto the list is the rewards. After the fight, not only do you now unlock his time freeze ability, one of the best powers in the entire game, but if you return to the library, you find that OD isn't just still alive, he's now wearing a humiliating mask to show his defeat, and he now lets you rent every book from the library. So remember how I said each book provides you with stat buffs? Yeah, now you can get every single one of those buffs at once. So all on his own, OD is a nice nostalgic throwback fight. He's a fun little Easter egg, but what really gets him into the top 10 is the fact that these rewards are some of the best any boss provides you from any game this year.
Pillage my shelves as you please.
Number 9, Morty the Director from Luigi's Mansion 3. If you had told me that Luigi's Mansion 3 would have some of my favorite boss fights of the entire year, I would not have believed you. And yet, here we are. There are over a dozen bosses in this game, and almost all of them are really unique, well thought out, and loaded with personality. In fact, it was really hard for me to pick which boss fight from the game would make this list. My personal favorite was the Shark Ghost, who possessed an entire pirate ship as you were fighting on it. But if you look around the internet, everybody seems to agree on one particular fight as the best and most memorable, and that's Morty the Director. Morty is the spirit of a filmmaker who has lost his muse, so Luigi has to perform a series of tasks to get his mojo back, and once he feels inspired, he shoves Luigi into a movie set, at which point our green plumber finds himself the star of a kaiju film, where he has to fight off a giant Godzilla ripoff. The fight itself is clever with how you have to use your vacuum alongside Luigi to blow the monster's attacks back at him, but what really makes this the winner is that just like everything else in Luigi's Mansion 3, this fight is overloaded with charm. Not all fights have to be life or death struggles that push you to your limits. Some can just make you laugh and smile, and this one did that more than any other fight this year. Number 8, the Combat Veteran from Death Stranding. Remember how I said that we didn't do a boss fight list last year because most of those games were about personal discovery as opposed to taking on big baddies? Well, Death Stranding is another game like that, as it's meant to be a slow, quiet exploration of an open world and cares more about personal struggle than combat, which is what makes the fight with the Combat Veteran so shocking. Yes, there had been boss fights before this, but they were mostly against big goo monsters that matched the other big goo monsters in the game. But when Sam gets picked up and thrown into a vortex that lands him in the beach, a barrier between life and death, he is now in a World War I battle being hunted down by the mystery man he had been seeing visions of throughout the game. I know some people think the final fight with Higgs deserves the Death Stranding spot, but I had to go with this one for how shocking it was. Nothing in the game prepared us for this. And I mean that quite literally. They didn't even give you a gun in this game until about 5 seconds before this fight begins, so you really are just being thrown into the deep end of the pool on this one. The only reason this fight doesn't get any higher is because you do end up fighting the combat veteran in 2 similar battles later on, so by the end of the game, this one wasn't all that memorable anymore, but I'll never forget how shocking it was waking up in this battlefield only to be told, hey, get ready, it's time to fight. Number 7, Kala from Indivisible. In Indivisible, you recruit a huge army of friends to go battle a goddess who is attempting to destroy the world. When you finally fight her, she fills the screen with giant fists that will send you flying like a foot soldier in the old TMNT games, waiting for your opportunity to finally strike back. Once you do enough damage to her, she'll attempt to destroy the entire stage, so you have to escape to the one place Kala can't follow, the realm that exists within your own head. In there, you tell all of your friends you have to face Kala alone. So you have to go up to each of them and personally tell them goodbye, meaning right in the middle of this fight, they stop to tug at your heartstrings and remind you of all the deep connections you've made throughout this game. But right before you go back and fight Kala, after you have bid every one of your friends goodbye, there's one final message waiting for you. A flashback to your dearly departed father as he teaches you the very first lesson of the game, how to perform a perfect block. It's an odd message to get from him, but it is the first thing that he taught you in the game, so it really does speak to how far your character has come. You go into the final battle with Kala, and not only does she have 108 health bars, making her have the biggest lifespan of any character on this list, but she unleashes an astronomical number of new attacks that feel like every single one of them could be your end, and none of your friends are there anymore to back you up, and none of your attacks work on her. However, with each attack, Kala loses some of her own health, so it becomes obvious pretty quickly the answer is just survive. Make it past all of these attacks until she destroys herself. Problem is, these attacks are huge, some taking up the entire screen, and even blocking, they still take off a chunk of your health large enough to kill you after only a few hits. How are you supposed to survive all this? I died several times to these attacks until finally it hit me.
When you have learned to concentrate, when you can actually block my strikes, maybe then we can talk about Mother's axe.
Really?
Really. A solid defense is the root of any proper combat strategy.
You can't just block these attacks, you have to perfect block them. Just like your dad taught you at the very beginning of the game. And in this final bout, if you manage to perfect block an attack, not only does it do no damage, it actually heals you. This is a wonderful way to bring this story full circle, considering that in the beginning, Ajna didn't want to listen to her father. She didn't want to learn how to block, she wanted to learn how to attack so she could become a great warrior. But in the end, she realizes his lessons were truly important and that sometimes not fighting is the correct path to building the better future she's trying to create. Number 6, Malikos from Jedi Fallen Order. It was so hard picking a boss from Jedi Fallen Order because this is another game just loaded with amazing fights. But to me, the best one in the whole game is Malikos, the Jedi who crash landed on a brutal, unforgiving planet and essentially turned into the Star Wars equivalent of Colonel Kurtz. And before anyone brings it up, I don't consider the final character you face to be a boss fight. Yes, it is awesome, but it's more of an action sequence than a fight to me. Throughout this game, you have a variety of tools at your command, but when you face Malikos, he's such a skilled fighter that most of them are useless and the match comes down almost entirely to parrying. And you need to be good with it too, as he will be relentless with his attacks. I spent much of this fight having to dodge over and over, only for his lightsaber to get so close I could feel them trimming my whiskers. And to make matters worse, you only get a few opportunities to fight back, and when you do, your hits do such little damage compared to the other enemies. This makes this a battle that can really push you to the limits, but what makes it even better is that there's a great beat for the story in the middle of this fight. When you get Malikos' health down to halfway, you start to receive help from Mirren, who pops up to provide you with cover, which is a great moment for the story as it shows her coming to trust you, and she's now willing to stand up and fight back against the man who ruined her home. Number 5, Jenna Anderson from Astral Chain. I am a sucker for multi-form boss fights, and personally, my favorite fight like that this year was Jenna Anderson from Astral Chain. It starts off with the mad scientist terrorist Jenna Anderson summoning out chimeric powers to slice at you with her mutane bite and summoning out spikes from the ground. Once you do enough damage to her, she transforms into her next stage, a winged monster who flies off to kill your boss, at which point you're treated to a motorcycle chase to catch up to her. Not exactly part of the boss fight itself, but it is a great way to break up the acts of this battle. This next stage proves to be much more challenging than her first form, but it's still a pretty standard boss fight. Until she goes into stage 3. Transforming into a giant deity that looks like the final boss of a Final Fantasy game, and she starts destroying the very landscape around you. At this point, you have to use your Legion to jump from one crumbling building to another, making your way through the sky, having to fight your way past the monster she's summoning out, and watching out for the fire she's raining down upon you. And even when you reach her, she's still not done, as you now have to destroy her giant oversized claws before being able to deliver the final blow. This fight has a perfect level of escalation, going from fighting a human to a monster to a god, and by the end of the battle, I could not believe how crazy this fight had become. Number 4, Ishin the Sword Saint from Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. In Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, I fought some of the hardest bosses I've ever faced in a game. But I kept looking forward to that final boss battle, because if I know anything about Soulsborne bosses, it's that even though the final boss tends to be tough, they're never the hardest one in the game. So if I could get past all these other bosses, then the final one would definitely be much easier by comparison. So after facing bosses that drove me insane with the perfect timing they required, I finally reached the final boss, only to find, nope, for once, he is indeed the toughest boss in the game. Not only does he have 4 stages, which just feels unfair at that point, but each stage has a variety of attacks that require you to learn exactly where to stand or when to parry, knowing if you screw up by even an inch or a microsecond, you're done for. I faced this boss on a stream, and after several attempts, I had to take a break. I told everyone I would fight him off screen, and when I felt like I could finally beat him, then I would come back and we would all finish the fight together. So after hours of labbing against Ishin, I got his final health bar down halfway, so I started up the stream again thinking we would finally beat him, only for this to happen. He's on his 3rd stage and his posture meter is huge. It is huge. If I can get like 1 lightning strike on him, because he's shooting lightning right now, so if I can get like 1 lightning counter on him, he's donezo McGunzo. So that is it. I'm going to go over to inventory. I'm going to use an item that I have not used this entire game. I've been collecting them non-stop. Haven't used them this entire game. The bundled Jizo statue. This instantly gives me another revive. Let's go. I'm dead! I'm not even mad. This was one of the most punishing and strict bosses I have faced in my entire life. But because of that, I felt amazing when I finally beat him. It gave me one of the biggest rushes of any game this year. Number 3, Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. Okay, listen, the Mr. X fight in Resident Evil 2 isn't anything all that great in terms of combat. He does have some powerful hits and an instant kill move that charges from full screen, but that's about it. And compared to the last few bosses that we mentioned, that's nothing special. But you know what is special? Everything else surrounding this fight. You fight Mr. X on an elevator that's descending from a secret evil base that's about to explode, putting a whole other level of tension behind this match. You finish X off with Ada throwing you a rocket launcher from the shadows, which isn't just an iconic way to finish a boss in the Resident Evil series, it also reveals that Ada is still alive. Which, okay, yeah, we all know that because this is the Resident Evil 2 remake, and if you've played Resident Evil 4, then you know she's alive, but hey, if this was your first Resident Evil game, that was still a big moment. But most importantly, and the number 1 reason why this fight makes the list, is because it's the fight with Mr. X, the guy who has been chasing you down and making your life a waking nightmare all throughout the game. You have been waiting all throughout the night to finally go up against him and finish this once and for all. So with that much buildup and that much hype going into this battle, there's no way this fight couldn't have made the top 10. This last match could just have been a pickup basketball game or a rock, paper, scissors match. Hell, Leon could just have pulled out a bag of quarters and taken Mr. X down to the Raccoon City arcade and challenged him to a game of Street Fighter for all I care. It still would have cracked the top 10. Although, if you're talking about fights that have been built up to, we have to talk about the number 2 fight with Zayin Ort in Kingdom Hearts 3. This evil old man has been a thorn in your side from the very start, even when you didn't know he was the one being a thorn in your side. Throughout this series, you have faced off against Zayin Ort's Heartless, his Nobody, his minions. You have faced every possible version of Zayin Ort without actually facing Zayin Ort, and now it was finally time. And even with all that buildup, the actual battle didn't disappoint. The Kingdom Hearts games always had great boss fights, and they weren't afraid to just go bananas in this last fight. Not only does he have one of the biggest life bars of anyone on this list, as well as speed and maneuverability that makes landing even a single punch on him feel like a challenge, he goes all out on the cinematic qualities of this fight. He'll take control of the entire map and fold it around like a scene from Inception, so you don't even know up from down as you fight him. Only then to flood the screen and take this battle under the sea. And once you think you've got that figured out, he'll pull out even more stops and take the battle to the sky as he unleashes a whole new array of powers, including possibly the most over-the-top moment in this entire franchise, a franchise known for over-the-top boss fight moments where he sucks you into his own world of darkness and fights you with his own shadow army. For this final battle, this game really pulled out all the stops in a way that forced you to use every skill you had learned throughout the game. The only reason he's not number 1 is, honestly, I feel like he's a little too over the top. There are moments where he almost feels broken, but maybe that's just me. But there was one other boss this year that took a long-running rivalry and a story that had been building over multiple games and brought to a head in a way that provided you with fresh new moves while forcing you to use everything that you had learned throughout the game for a boss fight that many people aren't just calling the best boss fight of the year. I've even seen multiple people calling it the best boss fight of the decade. Virgil from Devil May Cry 5. Not only does this have a great setup, being the final battle between brothers Dante and Virgil, an epic setting sitting atop a giant demon plant that's reaching into space and threatening to destroy the entire world, but the Devil May Cry franchise has always been known for its amazing combat. And this battle just let you mix up every skill you had picked up throughout the game to make it incredibly enjoyable and immensely replayable. But that alone wouldn't get to the number 1 spot. That comes from halfway through this match when Dante and Virgil charge at each other for one last clash, the death blow to end it all, only for Nero, Virgil's abandoned son and Dante's protege, to burst onto the scene in his newly awakened Devil Trigger, declaring that this party is just getting started. Dante had his own baggage with his brother, but Nero had been living with feeling like he wasn't strong enough to save those important to him ever since the last game. And now his father, who he never even knew, shows up, rips Nero's arm off, and threatens to kill his friends and the entire world. Yeah, that was enough for Nero to awaken the powers inside of him, and he's going to use this newfound strength to settle things with Virgil once and for all. From here, you get a whole new variety of Devil Trigger abilities, but none of them feel out of sync with how you had already been fighting. It fits together perfectly with what you already knew how to do. So essentially, when this fight starts off and you're playing Dante, it rewards you for all of your hard work and how much you've learned throughout the game. But then when you switch to Nero, it lets you just go crazy with how over the top it is. And getting to see Nero finally confront Virgil was so cathartic. I mean, hell, Nero activates his Devil Trigger by giving Virgil the finger and yelling out, "Fuck you!" You know this poor kid has been needing to get that off his chest forever, and as a longtime DMC fan, it made me so happy to see someone slap the arrogant, smug look off Virgil's face. So for providing some of the best combat of any game this year and being a great finale to the story, this fight has to be number 1. But those were just our picks. There were so many amazing fights this year that we just couldn't squeeze on here, but we really wanted to talk about. So let us know your favorite fights in the comments down below. Also, make sure that you come back later this week for the finale to our big 2019 retrospective, in which we give you our top 10 video games of the year. And make sure that you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so that way you don't miss it. And if you like this video, please share it around the internet and give us a thumb up. It is the best way to help our channel grow. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time.